A millionaire pays a homeless woman to have a baby, but when the child was born, he was shocked by what he saw. Before we begin the story, comment below with the city you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Daniel Grant, a 42-year-old tycoon, had everything: money, power, and status. He had built an empire from the ground up, controlled countless businesses, and held influence in places most people couldn't even dream of reaching. People admired him, envied him, and even feared him. Yet, despite his wealth and accomplishments, something was missing. As he stood alone in his grand, cold mansion, the realization hit him harder than ever. He had no heir, no one to carry on his legacy, no one to inherit the empire he had spent decades creating. Daniel had tried love once, twice, even 3 times. Each time it ended in disappointment. Love, he believed, was nothing but an illusion, a distraction. Marriage was a gamble, and he was not the type of man to take risks when it came to his future. But a child? That was different. A child was not about emotions or romance. A child was an investment, his blood, his legacy, his future. He wanted an heir, but on his terms. And so Daniel made a decision. He would not waste time on relationships or marriage. Instead, he would find a woman willing to carry his child under a strict contract. No emotions, no attachments, just business. The next morning, he set out to find the perfect candidate. But he never expected that the woman he would choose would change his life forever. Daniel Grant had given up on love a long time ago. He had been engaged once, then married twice, and each time it had ended in betrayal, disappointment, or emotional chaos. Love, he had learned, was just another word for weakness. Relationships were unpredictable. Feelings complicated everything. He had watched as business partners lost everything because they let emotions cloud their judgment. That would never be him. But a child, now that was different. A child wasn't about emotions. A child was about legacy, about securing his name for generations. A child was an investment in the future, one he could mold, raise with discipline, and ensure they followed in his footsteps. Daniel didn't want a wife, a girlfriend, or any kind of emotional entanglement. He wanted an agreement, clear, simple, and binding. A woman who would carry his child and then walk away. No strings, no complications. With his resources, finding someone wouldn't be difficult. He had the money, the power, and the legal expertise to ensure everything went according to plan. The only thing left to do was find the right woman. And so, Daniel set out on a mission. He wasn't looking for love. He wasn't searching for companionship. He was searching for someone desperate enough to accept his offer, yet strong enough to carry his heir. He had no idea that fate had already chosen that person for him. And she was about to change everything. Daniel Grant drove through the city streets in his sleek black car, his mind focused on one thing: finding the right woman for his plan. He didn't want someone from his social circle. He wanted someone desperate enough to accept his offer, someone with nothing to lose. As he stopped at a red light near downtown, his gaze landed on a young woman sitting on the sidewalk. She was hunched over a worn-out piece of paper, sketching with a pencil so small it barely fit between her fingers. Her clothes were tattered, her dark hair tangled, but there was something about her that made him pause. She wasn't begging. She wasn't looking for pity. She was lost in her art, completely unaware of the world around her. The light turned green, but Daniel didn't move. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Who sits on the sidewalk and draws like nothing else exists? Annoyed by his own curiosity, he sped off. But a few blocks later, he found himself pulling into a parking lot. His mind was racing. This was ridiculous. And yet, he turned the car around. Minutes later, he pulled up beside her and rolled down his window. His voice was direct and cold. "You, come here." Evelyn looked up, her blue eyes sharp with suspicion. "I'm not asking," he continued. "I have a business offer that could change your life." She hesitated but slowly stood up. Something about this man made her uneasy, but something in his tone told her he wasn't bluffing. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Fine, let's talk." And just like that, Evelyn Carter's life changed forever. Daniel took Evelyn to a quiet cafe, one far away from the noise and chaos of the city. She sat stiffly across from him, her hands curled around the warm cup of coffee the waiter had placed in front of her. She hadn't had a proper meal in days, but she wasn't about to show weakness in front of this man. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "What's this business offer?" Daniel leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "I want you to have my child." Evelyn blinked. Then she let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You're joking, right?" "I don't joke," he replied. "This is a serious offer. I will cover all your expenses, medical care, housing, everything. Once the child is born, you will be given enough money to start over." Evelyn's stomach twisted. She had lived on the streets long enough to know that nothing in life came without a cost. "And what happens after the baby is born?" she asked. "You walk away. No strings. No claims." Her hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her cup. "So, you're asking me to sell my child?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "I'm offering you a way out. A second chance." Evelyn looked down at her torn sleeves. The harsh reality of her life weighed on her. A warm bed, hot meals, the future. Finally, she met his gaze. "I want it in writing." Daniel smirked. Already prepared, he slid a contract across the table. Evelyn hesitated, her heart pounding. Then, gripping the pen tightly, she signed her name. And just like that, there was no turning back. Evelyn stepped through the massive iron gates, her breath catching as she took in the towering mansion before her. It was the kind of place she had only seen in movies. Polished marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and rooms that stretched larger than the entire shelters she had once stayed in. Yet, despite the overwhelming luxury, she felt nothing but emptiness. A maid guided her to her suite, a spacious room with a king-sized bed, a walk-in closet, and a bathroom bigger than any apartment she had ever lived in. She was given new clothes, gourmet meals, and anything she asked for. And yet, she still felt like an outsider. Daniel remained distant, treating her like a contract, not a person. He barely spoke to her, only checking in through his assistant, Grace. Their conversations were short, formal, and to the point. "How is the pregnancy progressing?" "Everything is fine." "Good. Let me know if you need anything." That was it. No warmth, no personal connection. Evelyn should have been relieved. This was what she signed up for, after all. No emotions, no complications. Just a deal. But as she lay in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, a strange loneliness crept into her. She had sold her future for security, but for the first time, she wondered if it was worth it. As the weeks passed, Evelyn's belly grew, and so did an unexpected shift in Daniel's behavior. At first, it was small. He started asking about her doctor's visits, making sure she had the best prenatal care. Then he went further. One evening, after returning to her room, she found a package on her bed. Inside was a brand new set of sketchbooks and high-quality pencils. She stared at them in disbelief. Had Daniel done this? She hadn't drawn in months, not since she had been forced onto the streets. And yet, somehow, he had remembered the first time they met, her sitting on the sidewalk, sketching on a scrap of paper. Later that night, she ran into him in the hallway. "Did you get me this?" she asked hesitantly. Daniel barely glanced at her. "I noticed you like to draw." It seemed practical. Practical? That was the word he chose? Evelyn didn't know why, but the gesture unsettled her. She had expected him to remain cold, detached. But this was something different. And suddenly, the lines between business and something else started to blur. Evelyn lay on the examination table, her hands resting on her growing belly as the doctor moved the ultrasound wand across her skin. She had done this routine checkup before, but today something felt different. The doctor's eyes flickered with surprise. He adjusted the screen, then smiled. "Well, this is unexpected," he said. Evelyn tensed. What's wrong?" The doctor turned the monitor toward her. "Nothing's wrong. But you're not carrying one baby, you're carrying two. You're having twins." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "Twins?" she echoed, her heart pounding. From the corner of the room, Daniel stiffened. He had been sitting in his usual composed, detached manner, but now, for the first time, his mask cracked. His fingers curled into a fist as he stared at the screen. This wasn't just about producing an heir anymore. This was something much bigger. 2 lives. Evelyn turned her head, watching him closely. He was always controlled, always confident. But right now he looked shaken. As they left the clinic, silence stretched between them. The weight of the revelation pressed down on both of them. Finally, as they reached the car, Evelyn whispered, "What are you thinking?" Daniel didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice lower than usual, he admitted, "This changes things." She didn't know what he meant, but deep down she felt it too. Everything had changed. After the shocking news, something shifted between Daniel and Evelyn. He was still guarded, but now he started showing up more. He attended every doctor's appointment without being asked. He made sure she had everything she needed. And, most surprisingly, he started spending time with her, just talking. One evening, they sat outside on the mansion's balcony. The city lights flickered in the distance, but for once, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. "I didn't expect this," Daniel admitted suddenly. Evelyn turned to him. "The twins, everything," he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I planned for one child. A simple arrangement. No complications." She swallowed. "And now?" He didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he said, "Now, I don't know." For the first time, he seemed unsure, vulnerable. And that scared her more than anything, because she could feel herself changing too. She had convinced herself she could walk away once the contract ended, that this was just a deal. But now, as she watched Daniel, as she felt the babies move inside her, she wasn't so sure anymore. Could she really leave? And if she did, would she ever be the same again? Evelyn woke up in the middle of the night with sharp, unbearable pain shooting through her body. She gripped the sheets, trying to breathe through it, but the intensity only grew. This was it. The babies were coming. She barely had time to call for help before another wave of pain hit. Within minutes, Daniel was at her door, his usual calm shattered by panic. "It's too early," she gasped. "We need to get to the hospital." "Now," he said, already helping her up. The drive to the hospital was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Daniel barked orders, ensuring everything was ready for her arrival. He had planned for this moment down to the last detail. But now, as he watched Evelyn struggle through the contractions, he felt completely powerless. In the delivery room, he stayed by her side, gripping her hand as she cried out in pain. "You're doing amazing," he whispered, though his own hands were shaking. Then the first cry filled the room, a baby boy. Seconds later, another, their daughter. Daniel barely breathed as the doctor placed the newborns in Evelyn's arms. He had spent his life chasing wealth, power, and control. But as he looked at the tiny, fragile lives in front of him, nothing had ever mattered more. They weren't just heirs. They were his children. And as Evelyn held them close, a new fear gripped his heart. He couldn't let her go. Days passed, and Evelyn knew what was coming. The contract was clear. After the birth, she was supposed to leave. She packed her bags in silence, her heart aching as she glanced at the cribs where the twins slept peacefully. She had convinced herself she could do this, that this was just a deal. But now, walking away felt impossible. When she stepped into the grand foyer, Daniel was already there, standing near the door. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed something deeper: hesitation, regret, maybe even pain. Neither of them spoke at first. The weight of the moment hung between them like a final goodbye. Evelyn tightened her grip on the suitcase handle. "This is it then," she said softly. Daniel's jaw clenched. His hands curled into fists at his sides. "You're really leaving?" She swallowed hard. "That was the deal, wasn't it?" He took a deep breath, looking away for a moment. And then, in one swift motion, he pulled the contract from his pocket and tore it in half. Evelyn gasped as the pieces fluttered to the ground. "Stay," he said, his voice raw. "Not because of the contract. Not because of the twins. Stay. Because I need you." Her heart pounded. For the first time, there were no rules, no obligations, just a choice. And as she looked at him, she realized she already knew her answer. Evelyn stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, as she stared at the torn pieces of the contract on the floor. "Daniel," she whispered, unsure if she had really heard him right. He stepped closer, his voice softer than she had ever heard before. "I don't want you to stay because of some deal. I don't want you to leave just because it's what we agreed to. I want you to stay because I want you, not just as the mother of my children, but as you." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, but she fought them back. She had spent her whole life being abandoned, discarded, unseen. And now, standing in front of the man who once treated her as a mere transaction, she saw something real, something she had never expected. "I was ready to leave," she admitted, voice trembling. "But the truth is, I don't want to." Daniel exhaled sharply, as if he had been holding his breath. She took a shaky step forward. "I don't know how this works, Daniel. I don't know if we can make this work." He gently cupped her face, his eyes filled with something she never thought she'd see in him: love. "Then let's figure it out together." And for the first time, Evelyn let herself believe in something more. They weren't just two people bound by a contract anymore. They were a family. And for Daniel, it was the first time he truly understood. Love was the one thing money could never buy. Comments: how would you rate this story from 0 to 10? Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep up with all our stories, and don't forget to check out more touching stories by clicking here on the end screen.